3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for joining us at our weekly press briefing on coronavirus in Greater Manchester, but also a roundup on other things, joined this afternoon by our Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverley Hughes, and I'll bring Bev in a moment. To start, as always, with the overview of where we are and some of the figures you've become familiar with over recent weeks. What I can report at the beginning again is that the picture continues to move in the same direction that we've been seeing in recent times. We currently have 29 patients in intensive care in Greater Manchester, down from 35 last week, and that's quite a big drop that we've seen over the last few weeks, which of course is really good news. In terms of patients in non-ICU beds, that fell this week from 428 to 378, which is what it is as of yesterday. Again, trending in the right direction. In terms of hospital admissions, the number of daily admissions for yesterday was 11, and again that represents a fall over recent weeks. Bed occupancy in hospitals across GM is slowly rising, and this is obviously a good thing because it shows that other activity is returning to the NHS and currently stands just under 74%. So that's positive. In terms of care homes, a similar picture. 9 of our care homes report a case or an outbreak over the last week, 9 additional, so that takes it to 404 as a total. So you're looking at 3/4 of care homes in Greater Manchester have now reported a case or a cluster of cases. The percentage of care homes currently who are saying at least one resident is COVID-19 positive is 12%, down from 15% last week. In terms of what that means in terms of the residents, the population of residents, 1% of the care home residents currently have symptoms, a positive diagnosis of COVID-19, compared to 2% last week. So movement again in the right direction. However, today I'm going to give you a new figure, and it's important just to explain this figure so that we can understand what it means and present it to you in the right way. For the first time this week, GM has received the Pillar 2 testing data for our 10 boroughs. When I've been reporting new cases to you over recent weeks, that has only been the Pillar 1, the local tests carried out. Finally, we've been able to put Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 together and get much more of a truer picture in terms of what's going on with the spread or the circulation of COVID-19 within Greater Manchester and within our communities. Firstly, the Pillar 1 figure, that was 78 this week, which actually would represent quite a fall really from where it was just a few weeks ago. But when you bring in the Pillar 2 data, this is a figure that I think people just need to hear and just think about, because when you add the two together, the number of positive diagnoses of COVID-19 over the last 7 days is 465. Now that's a number that I think people need to hear, because obviously it represents a significant number of new cases, and while the overall numbers will be are coming down and transmission is reducing, nevertheless there is still a significant amount of COVID-19 circulating within Greater Manchester. And I think what this is saying to you today is, rather than it being portrayed as an increase or a decrease, I think what we're putting before you by giving you this number, and I think we're the first part of the country to put this combined number out, is that this for the first time is if you like, we're seeing the true picture for the first time. Some of this has been hidden to us until this point. Finally, we can see the full number of cases, and it's a significant number, and people need to be aware of that. Now, I just need to explain it a little further by saying Greater Manchester authorities are at the top of the list in terms of numbers of tests being carried out. We are carrying out more tests here than pretty much everywhere else in the country, so that needs to be remembered. And obviously, the reflection that you're seeing in this figure is obviously of that increased testing activity. But I'll just finish before I hand over to the Deputy Mayor with something that was said during our Greater Manchester Combined Authority meeting today, and a concern expressed by leaders that the message is sort of going out as people look at the images of the beaches across the country, particularly Bournemouth, and what we've seen with gatherings in towns and cities across the country, that lockdown is over. Well, what I would say is it can't be. Everybody needs to refocus on what the Chief Medical Officer is saying. The risk is clearly a present risk, and people need to focus again on the government's advice, particularly in this period where people are beginning to emerge from lockdown and return to a degree of normality. So, this is an important piece of news, and I would say that to me says there's a significant number of new cases being diagnosed, even if the overall picture is down. It's a warning sign to look at very carefully indeed, and we will be doing over the coming days and weeks. So I will leave that there for now, and I will hand over to our Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverley Hughes. Bev.
Thank you, Andy. I'll give an update on, I think, some important issues of policing and safety. You remember I reported at the press conference last week that we were planning a multi-agency partnership campaign operation to respond to the incidents the previous weekend of two very, very large raves, musical, unauthorised, unlicensed musical events. And so on the weekend of the 20th, we had in place this large-scale multi-agency operation. And I'm pleased to report that approach, which was very much calling on the public to pass intelligence to us, trying to get ahead of the game in terms of any plans for these events that were beginning to take place, to make sure that, as far as we could, the police and the local authority partners together could prevent crowds gathering to such an extent that the size of the crowd became an issue in terms of dispersal. And that was very successful. The police prevented what was thought to be about 13 raves by taking that approach, by being able to appear early and dismantle equipment and prevent the crowds gathering. They also, that weekend, attended a number of other events which weren't raves, but they were large gatherings of people, but those gatherings were peaceable. They hadn't involved calls on social media to gather, and the police took the approach in those instances of containing, of being on site, making sure they stayed peaceable and orderly, and that's the decision making that the police have to make. I think it's important that I mention one event that took place in Moss Side. It wasn't a rave, it was an authorised event. The City Council had authorised it. Local councillors were present. It was a Black Lives Matter event involving a lot of families from the Moss Side area, and it took place largely in the daytime, and it was policed by the neighbourhood police officers who were part of the arrangements with the City Council. As you know, that was a very peaceable event. it started to disperse as agreed in the early evening, and then an after party, if you like, started some streets away. Some of the same people drifted to another location, and a street party started there. And very sadly, towards the end of that, in the early hours of Sunday morning, 2 people were shot. Abriomi Ajose, a 36-year-old man who'd been a previous care worker, I think, for the City Council, and Sharif Tal, a 21-year-old young man, was shot. There has been an arrest today of a woman from Birmingham, and the police are continuing with that investigation. Looking ahead to this weekend, we are continuing to repeat the multi-agency partnership plan that was successful in relation to the raids last weekend. That will use the same approach. We're calling on the public again not to attend any large-scale events, really. As the Mayor has just outlined, there is still a very significant health issue. So we're calling on the public not to attend any events, and also to pass any intelligence they get, any information that they get about planned events, illegal events, to the police as soon as possible. I might say that in relation to the unauthorised events on the 13th of June at Daisy Nook and Carrington, there have been 2 arrests of people the police think are organisers. And actually today, they also made 2 further arrests based on intelligence that they got of people who are planning a large event on the 4th of July. That's next weekend, when, as you know, a lot of the restrictions on congregating and mixing with people are to be relaxed. And a lot of equipment was found at this address in North Manchester of one of those particular people associated with his planning for a very large event. I think it's very important to say that obviously you're seeing events across the country in which the feeling that people have, I think, that lockdown is over, coming out in streets, coming out on beaches, with quite a lot of disorder resulting for that. I think that is an indication of the fact that we are in quite a volatile situation across the country. And of course, the events in relation to George Floyd have compounded that too, understandably, and led very sadly here to the death of those 2 people. And I'd like to pass my condolences to their families and also to the wider community in Moss Side for what happened there. So our policing work across the partnership will continue this weekend, and for the foreseeable future. I think the weekend of the 4th of July will be one in which we will have to have a very robust set of arrangements in place, given what's been discovered today. I perhaps need to say something as well on the safety front in relation to fire, and to say that the Mayor and I and 5 of our local MPs have written to the Home Secretary today, calling for national legislation to make it a criminal offence to use a disposable barbecue on either moorland or peatland because of the risk of fire here, which we have seen in the past, and also to improve the resources going into our fire services so that they can more effectively deal with the situations that they are facing. I think the general situation to report is that, and in one sense this is very good, but it's stretching the police service. There's a very high level of demand now coming in to the police, both on 999 calls and on 101 calls. I think some of this is to do with, on the 101 side, the intelligence being passed into the police. But I think, again, it just reflects the fact that there's a lot going on. We expect a very busy weekend, and possibly some difficult situations for the police and our local authority partners to make their judgments about, but to make sure that we retain an orderly place, want people to obviously enjoy themselves and start to socialise, but to do so in ways that does not jeopardise either themselves, the police or the wider public. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Bev, and I just want to echo your words of condolence to Abayomi and Sherry's family. The shock in the Moss Side community is significant, and we understand that, and we'll be working with the community going forward to build confidence. But I think we both wanted to say today how much we feel for the families of the two lives that were lost, and reaffirming our commitment to work with the community to recover from what happened. Just moving on to other items. Tomorrow is Armed Forces Day, and all 10 councils in Greater Manchester will be raising the Armed Forces flag. We are the country's longest standing, most productive recruiting ground for the armed forces, and we take our commitment to the armed forces very seriously indeed. And while there won't be the normal parades tomorrow, we'll certainly be holding online events to mark Armed Forces Day, as that's very important to us and to our communities. Just a couple of pieces of information. Household waste recycling centres, I can confirm that as of tomorrow, all 20 such centres in Greater Manchester, well, in nine of the boroughs in Greater Manchester, Wigan runs its separate waste arrangements. All 20 of those centres will be offering a 7-day service as of tomorrow, although we're still advising people to only visit if it's essential to remove waste from the home environment. A couple of final things before we open up for your questions. We continue to think about how we can support families who've been bereaved as a result of the crisis that we're all living through. And just to give you the latest the figures on that, the cumulative number of deaths in Greater Manchester, and this includes all settings, not just hospital, is 2,814. It's a huge number, and we're very conscious that behind that statistic lies people who were loved, people who were sons and daughters, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, each one of them a tragedy for the families concerned. And we've been working with Manchester Cathedral to consider how we might allow those families to remember them and record their feelings about their loved ones, recognising that many have not been able to hold funerals as normal. And we particularly wanted to recognise specially people who have been working to serve others through this period in the National Health Service and in social care, who in the service of others have lost their lives too. So what we've agreed with Manchester Cathedral is that we will be holding an online memorial service on the 16th of July. And on that day launch an online book of remembrance, open to anybody in Greater Manchester to send in photos and memories, so that can be a personal but also a public record of all of the people that we've lost, and a space that families can use to record some of their thoughts and their memories. So we're really grateful to the Cathedral and to volunteers in the tech sector in Greater Manchester for making this happen. We hope this will be of some comfort to families who are grieving right now, as well as being a way of recognising those public servants who gave so much and who truly will never be forgotten. One final announcement before we hand over to questions is to alert you to a press release which we'll be issuing shortly. This is about our commitment to support young people through this crisis, recognising that in many ways they are facing the highest levels of disruption to their lives. Young people who are in the middle of apprenticeships, about to take A-levels, starting their first job. The effect of moments like this can be felt most profoundly by youngest people, and actually the scarring effects of moments like this can cause most damage. in the younger generation. So we're committed to doing what we can to support young people through this, and I've spoken of creating a young person's guarantee alongside a young person's task force, which we're really pleased that Diane Medal has agreed to chair. So that task force is setting about its work, but we wanted to make some early moves to show young people of our support and ways in which we're planning to help them through this time. So I can confirm that as part of our 2-year pilot to introduce free bus travel for 16 to 18-year-olds in Greater Manchester, the new cohort will be able to apply for their Hour Pass, as it's called, as of next Wednesday. So that will open for applications Wednesday, the 1st of July. We are staunch supporters here of the government's Care Leavers Covenant, and we've been debating over the last couple of years what we can do to support our care leavers. And we think this is particularly important at this moment. Young people who don't have a mum and dad to fall back on will need more support in the challenging times that we are in. So we have agreed now to move forward on our commitment to give care leavers aged 18 to 21 in Greater Manchester the same benefits as our pass holders. So free bus travel and access to the R-Pass exclusive offers. That's a major move in the direction of a care leavers guarantee for Greater Manchester, which we will confirm later this year. But we wanted to make that move now so that those young people know they've got our support and can plan accordingly. So again, that will be available for applications as of next week. We're also confirming today that young people who've been benefiting from R-Pass, who are R-Pass holders, but are soon to lose their entitlement because they've gone through what we would say is year 13 and ordinarily would lose entitlement. We are unable, sadly, to offer them free bus travel, but we are going to give them access to the opportunities side of R-Pass. So that's a positive benefit for those over 18s who are R-Pass holders and will now use their existing pass to be able to access some of those free tickets and free opportunities that are on the R-Pass website. And as part of all of this, I'm making a public appeal today to all Greater Manchester businesses to make an offer to young people through the R-Pass scheme. That might be a small thing, big thing, it doesn't matter. We just want all of our businesses to step forward and work with us to support our young people through this crisis, because we really believe they need our help right now, and the moment is now to get that support in place, and it's why I'm confirming those moves today. So I will leave it there, and I will ask Jimmy, who is going to be moderating your questions today. So over to you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Andy. And the first question in the Q&A on the right-hand side of your screen is at the very bottom at 126, and this is from Jen Williams. This is for Andy. You referenced Pillar 2 data earlier, Andy, and Jen is asking if it's possible to get a sense of the geographic spread of the data, the Pillar 2 data, if not exact figures, at least a sense of where in GM the numbers might be higher or lower.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. So I've not seen the postcode data, Jen, for this data that I've just read out to you today. I last saw, if you like, localized information for Greater Manchester about 10 days ago. And I think I have confirmed before that it was more concentrated in the east and the northeast of Greater Manchester in terms of the number of new positive diagnoses. But I haven't got that geographic information for this data. I think it arrived with us on Tuesday this week, so it is new data. And just to say again, it is a reasonably significant number, 465. But just to stress again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's growing or falling. It's impossible to compare, to be honest, because we've never had this aggregate number before. So in effect, it's almost as if the light is going on for the first time across Greater Manchester on the number of cases that are there. You know, we're seeing the full picture for the first time, if that makes sense. We will probably be able to provide more localized information going forward, but we're not quite at that position yet. We do have an ambition to do that, but we've got to be confident in the data before we do. And as I've just indicated, this is very new to us, this data, so we're just getting used to using it. But nevertheless, I think that figure is an accurate figure. It does reflect the fact that some of our boroughs are at the very top of the table when it comes to the number of tests being carried out. But you know, we need to digest what this means, and we wanted the public to know about it, because clearly it can't be the case that we're back to normal. We're not. There is a large amount of this virus circulating in Greater Manchester, and people need to know that, and they need to take precautions, and they've got to continue to adopt a safety first approach, listening closely to the advice of the Chief Medical Officer.
Thank you, Andy. So a handful of questions for both yourself and Bev on raves and other illegal outdoor gatherings. The first is for Andy specifically at 1:15. That's from Kim Pilling at the Press Association. Kim asks, on Monday, Avon and Somerset Police apologised for missing a chance to stop a mass lockdown gathering, complete with DJ and sound system, in the streets of Bristol last Saturday night. Why have GMP and the Mayor yet to accept, let alone apologise, that a similar gathering, complete with DJ and sound system in a large residential area, should not have been allowed to get going and ultimately result in a double murder?
Thank you for your question, Kim. I don't know if these two events, the one you describe in Bristol, is comparable to the event that the Deputy Mayor described in Moss Side. As she explained, this began with an authorised event earlier in the day and then grew into an unauthorised, larger gathering, much larger. But it was an event which took place in that context. It was not one of the large-scale raves that we've seen and effectively now put in place measures to stop. The answer to your question is, you say it should not have been allowed to get going. These are incredibly difficult policing judgments in the moment, and the police have to balance whether it's right to go in and then potentially see a reaction from that, or whether it's best to manage. And you know, these judgments have to be made in the moment, and it's very easy to sort of sit back from that and describe things in the way that you did, when actually, you know, it's a much more complicated judgment. And your question implies that the gathering gave rise to this tragic double murder. Well, as the Deputy Mayor said, it would appear that there was somebody who travelled to Greater Manchester who was involved in that, or potentially. So I don't think you could necessarily link the two things. Obviously, there was a coming together of the two things, but I think you'd have to be careful before you rush to that judgment. I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to say something too, Jimmy, because of course, you know, we look back at everything that we do. We're always ready to challenge ourselves. We've discussed this closely with Greater Manchester Police, but we've accepted their judgment that the best way to handle this was to work with the community rather than to go in and disrupt, which could have actually created a much more serious public order situation. But I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to say more. You're on mute, Bev.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I think you make the essential point here, that made this a particular case, and that is that an authorised event had taken place earlier in the day and dispersed as agreed with the City Council and the neighbourhood policing team. It had gone very well. It was good-natured. And then a later party started, and some of the same people who'd been at the earlier event drifted across to nearby streets where the second after party took place. And the police officers on the ground took the view that because they had supported the earlier event, it would not make sense to local people if they started to try and disperse this event. And so, you know, that was the reason in this particular instance that they did not intervene. Having said that, as Andy says, it is judgment call on the day. I'm just getting reports of an incident last night in which the public called the police about a large gathering of about 150 people, which the police did attend and try to disperse. One police officer was injured and 5 vehicles were damaged. And you know, that is the kind of consequence that you want to try and avoid. And that is the reason why their assessment on the ground at the time has to be about how can we contain any potential harm and risk and threat, both to the police themselves and the wider public. I will say though, and I think this comment has been made by the Mayor of London and we would endorse it, that any activity that seeks to attack police officers or any of our blue light workers will be dealt with really, really strongly. It's absolutely completely unacceptable and we will not allow that to happen. But it kind of reinforces the point I made earlier that, you know, people are now meeting in large gatherings. Yesterday in Greater Manchester, the police attended 39 large gatherings of various sizes. Not raves, but large social gatherings. And I think, you know, we're going to be putting a message out very strongly today to say these gatherings are still contrary to the advice. They are a risk in health terms. And clearly at the moment, with the kind of volatility that we have and people feeling it's now time to party, they can lead to situations where violence and disorder are happening. And we have to nip that in the bud and stop that taking place.
Bev. Thank you, Bev. There are 2 further questions about illegal gatherings, which maybe Bev is best to address in the first instance, and then I suppose Andy might come in off the back. And Bev, one is from Rowan Bridge at Radio 5 Live at 1:24, and then Nazia Parveen at The Guardian at 1:20. Rowan asks, and he appreciates it might be slightly outside of your remit, but he understands that Cheshire Police are warning of a potential illegal event or a number of events planned for this weekend, and whether you have any knowledge yourself of anything possibly taking place in Cheshire. Nazia asks, do you feel that we might be heading towards a summer of unrest? And are the police drawing up plans in anticipation of this? And also, do you feel whether the Home Secretary's approach and a consistent use of crackdown type language makes unrest more likely?
The police are working on intelligence all the time. I'm not particularly cited on anything they have from Cheshire Police, but I do know that they are reporting to me that they're getting significant pieces of intelligence coming in now as about this coming weekend. And also, as I said earlier, they've made an arrest today of somebody planning a rave here for the 4th of July, the weekend after. So the intelligence is absolutely critical to this because it's what will allow the police to attend something early, to disperse people before there's too many, and that is what they successfully did last weekend. Do you know, in terms of a summer of unrest, I think even starting to talk about that is not very helpful. But clearly, as I say, we're just mindful of the kind of mix of ingredients we have here, people coming out of a very restrained period, other tensions around in communities for all sorts of understandable reasons. I do think some of the rhetoric is not helpful. And I also think that the government really should have been much stronger in retaining a safety message about the risk of congregation in terms of health. And I think what the public have heard is a kind of dog whistle message almost that, you know, it's okay now, you know, we can go and do what we did before. And that is part of the reason why I think people feel that they can socialise now in ways that they want to. But we will be saying really strongly alongside the police, not just this weekend, but this weekend and beyond, it is still a risk. It is still not correct to socialise in very large groups, and we want people not to do that. That is by far the best option.
Thank you, Bev. And Andy, have you anything to add?
Briefly, Jimmy, thank you. Just to obviously agree with everything that Bev has said. But I tend to agree that I think the government has kind of erred on the side of getting the economy going in recent days, and not enough on the side of emphasising caution, doing things carefully in a staged way. I think it is a mistake to set this day, a Saturday, 4th of July, is the big day for reopening. I think that poses real challenges for Greater Manchester Police and other police forces around the country. Again, done without consultation with us. If they'd consulted, we would have said, do not do it in that way. So that, I think, is going to pose real challenges. I hope we aren't talking about a summer of unrest, Nazia, and I agree with the Deputy Mayor about that, but it is a unique moment with a lot of tensions circulating around at the same time. What I think the government should have done is do what I did earlier, which is get that testing data together, both the local data and the national data, and inform people properly about the localized picture in all parts of England, and link it to the R number, which we know is hovering close to 1, including here in the northwest as well. You know, that should have been the context in which unlocking was done. Cautious, safety first, staggered, and I don't think we've got that nature. The unlocking is not being done in that way. Given where we are, though, our appeal today is to the public to listen, hopefully, to what we're saying, what the Chief Medical Officer and others are saying, take on board the level of risk that is still out there. Absolutely. We will not tolerate attacks on police or public servants. Completely unacceptable, and nothing about this current moment we're living through justifies that, and we'll take the hardest possible line. We aren't saying that we can stop every rave or we can break up every gathering. That's not the approach that we've taken. The policy that we put in place last weekend, you asked for our plan. Well, we put a plan together this time last week, and we would say it was effective last weekend in bringing in extra intelligence, stopping a number of large gatherings from happening. But we're always going to have to take a more case-by-case approach to those large community gatherings that we're seeing, and make a balanced judgment with regard to public safety.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Bev. So, Andy, questions now about the Trafford Centre. The first is from Aaron Benson at Roch Valley Radio at 1:36. And Aaron says, we're hearing sad news with regards to Into, and specifically for Greater Manchester, the Trafford Centre, and the calling in of administrators. If the Trafford Centre does close, how economically damaging will this be for Greater Manchester? And then a connected question from Katerina Vitozzi at Sky, which is about staff specifically. Is there a plan to support these workers? The likely Into closure shows that the recession is likely to hit retail staff first. Is there a specific plan to help those working in this sector, should there be? And are you confident that Into are doing enough to support their many staff?
Well, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Katerina. Obviously, this is an ongoing situation, and we're watching it very closely indeed, because I think, Aaron, as you say, the Trafford Centre is a destination of national significance. So, of course, any interruption to business is economically damaging. And we would obviously be working very hard to support both those who run the Trafford Centre and the businesses who operate within it. As I say, at the moment, though, it's only an ongoing situation, and obviously we're watching reports, but we're led to believe that there's no imminent danger, but I wouldn't want to say that for certain, because it's obviously not a situation of which we have inside knowledge. And I would say to the public, obviously, keep an eye on the news if you're planning to travel to the Trafford Centre this weekend. Of course, we do think about the staff who will be affected by this. Now, of course, Into is separate to the retailers who occupy the retail spaces. Into is the company which runs the wider facility, and we do very much think about the people who are employed by Into. But you know, I would, if there was to be a closure, we would hope it would only be temporary. What I can say is, you know, what we've done in other instances where we've seen large-scale redundancy, as we saw with Thomas Cook last year. You know, we work hard at the Greater Manchester level to put in place support for people. Of course, we will do the same, and we'll support the owners of the Trafford Centre to get it up and running. If it does close, and that's an if, we just do not know. If it does, we would work with them to get it up and running as soon as possible. When I say there's no risk of an imminent closure, that's only a media report that I'm going on, so I wouldn't want people to put too much weight on that. I think people do need to watch the situation as it develops.
Thank you, Andy. So the next question is from Joseph at the Bolton News and Bury Times at 1:42. Andy, where do you stand on comments made by the actor Maxine Peake in The Independent, which Rebecca Long-Bailey shared, leading to her being sacked? And what does the sacking say about the Labour Party dealing with anti-Semitism under Keir Starmer?
Well, I don't have any further inside knowledge as to what has been reported, so I don't know all of the details in this case. It's clear that Rebecca made a mistake by endorsing the article, and I think Maxine Peake has since acknowledged that comments that she made were not necessarily entirely factual or accurate. So that was clearly a mistake. And the situation is, of course, we have a new leader of the Labour Party that is determined to ensure that there is no room for ambiguity anymore when it comes to Labour's position on anti-Semitism. So I think the decision that he took was entirely understandable in those circumstances.
Thank you, Andy. The next question, it's at 1:44, which is from Grace from Revolution News, and actually this might be one for Bev to address in the first instance. There is still concern from residents around Dovestone Reservoir about the amount of visitors, particularly in the hot weather that we've been having. It's been mentioned before about disposable barbecues, which is one of the concerns of residents, but are you aware of any measures in place to control the amount of visitors like we've heard about regarding beaches elsewhere in the UK?
Thank you, Grace. I'm not aware of any particular plans in that area. It wouldn't be part of our planning, I don't think, in that area. And I think it's something that the local authority and the police locally will have to assess and take what measures they think are necessary in terms of the impact of visitors and trying to deter people if they think that's the right thing to do. You know, that's what the councils in Bournemouth with their local authority and other blue light partners had to do in relation to what obviously was a very extreme situation on those beaches there. But that's where the kind of responsibility lies. It's what we're doing in Greater Manchester. And, you know, the responsibility does rest with the local authority and the police services in those areas. And I'm sure they'll be looking really closely at that situation.
Thank you, Bev. And to stay with you, perhaps, Bev, there's a question at the foot of the Q&A from David Collins at the Sunday Times. This is back on the topics of raves and illegal outdoor gatherings. David just asks if you have any information about numbers of future planned events in Greater Manchester. Earlier, yourself or Andy may have mentioned one on the 4th of July. Are you aware of any others at this stage?
I'm not aware of any others at this stage, David. That's the information I've just had now as we started this conference, actually, from Greater Manchester Police. And that's the arrest they've made in relation to the intelligence about that event that's being planned for the 4th of July. I think everybody around the country will be thinking about the 4th of July. As Andy said, it's unhelpfully a Saturday when the restrictions are relaxed very, very considerably. And, you know, depending on the constellation of other factors, good weather, the general feeling that, you know, this is another phased relaxation of measures to a very significant extent. I think everybody around the country will be watching and planning for events around that time, particularly that weekend. We depend on intelligence, and we've made that point a number of times, and the police will continue to focus on that because it is the only way really that we can get ahead of the game and start to stop raves happening in the first place, as opposed to being presented with an event that's already in full swing, which is much more difficult to deal with.
Thank you, Bev. Question for Andy at 1:45. Andy, Aaron Benson from Roch Valley Radio. This is about cycling, and cycling numbers continuously on the rise, which is great to see. Under the new B network, there are plans to see cycling routes, and he mentioned some in the Rochdale area. Do you have a sense of a time scale for the introduction of these routes? And also separately, Aaron asked about commuters and whether you expect, a real surge in uptake in the B network or cycling networks once people start getting back to work.
Thanks, Aaron. We've just had a meeting of the Combined Authority where we have accelerated a number of schemes under the B network. Many of them large schemes within the boroughs, and also a major scheme, Princess Road Mancunian Way, which is about creating new provision for cyclists and pedestrians to cross that busy junction and get into the city centre. So there is a load of progress. I mean, alongside the B network, we've also got the emergency active travel provisions that our councils are working with the government on, and some of those using traffic cones and temporary measures. So a great deal of work going on in this area. Just to give you the figures, the latest figures that I have, just seeing if I've got them to hand. I mean, the rise in cycling and walking continues and is sustained. It's around about a 22% increase since lockdown began. It is very dependent on the weather, but the minute the weather improves, we do see the figures go straight back up again. So there is clearly a lot of pent-up demand for safe, segregated cycling space in Greater Manchester, and our 10 boroughs are working together on a plan together with our Cycling and Walking Commissioner Chris Boardman. So it's exciting times, and today we've signed off funding to support a GM bike hire scheme, which we hope will be on the ground in spring next year.
Thank you, Andy. And a final question for you, Andy, and then Bev may also wish to comment on this before we close. It's just from Joseph at the Bolton News and Bury Times at 1:48. What is being done to support the arts and culture sector in Greater Manchester, which has taken a huge hit and threatens the future of theatres, including Bolton's Octagon, which was due to reopen in the spring?
Yeah, it's a good question, Joseph, because of course, the sector looks like it's going to be one of the last to reopen because of the nature of many of our cultural spaces, indoor space, people sitting close together. So real challenges, and we're very alive to those challenges. At the very beginning of this crisis, we had just agreed actually a new round of funding for our cultural organisations, and we decided to front load it to get it out of the door to support them through this difficult time. And this is GM's own commitment to the cultural sector. We've given a significant uplift to the funding because we just recognise how places like the Octagon bring so many people into GM and give us a presence on that national and international cultural map. So this is a city region that believes in the culture and the arts. We're aware of some of the challenges that the Octagon are facing, but we'll do our best to support them through those. What I would say is we all need to sort of join forces really and make an appeal to the government. There will need to be continued access to the furlough scheme, in my view, for the performing arts particularly, and that appeal is one that I will be making with other mayors across the country. We met the Arts Council recently and discussed these things, and I would also say that the government needs to take an approach here where if these theatres go dark, they could go dark for good, and these places are part of our national fabric. They are what brings places to life. If you want to level up, you've got to keep these lights burning within our regions. So it's a challenging time, no doubt, for the arts and culture sector, but they have our full support. We've done what we can through lockdown with United We Stream, raising funds for venues, promoting Greater Manchester talent. Our commitment to the sector is absolute. But we recognise that we're going to have to work harder in the coming time to support them. But be assured that the Octagon is very much on our radar indeed. Got a mention from the leader of Bolton at our combined authority meeting today, just to show that the issue is very much being talked about by the GM leaders.
Thank you. And Bev, do you have anything to add on that one, or not particularly?
Thank you, Jimmy. Well, I will, because one of my other hats, I'm a trustee of the Lowry Theatre, and obviously, you know, this very difficult issue is exercising those people responsible for the different venues in and around Greater Manchester. You know, this is nationally, this is one of our most important sectors, and in the last 10 years or more leading up to now, has been one of our biggest potential export sectors as well. You know, we're around the world for our creative and digital sectors now, and particularly so here in Greater Manchester. We're one of the foremost city regions in that sector, so it's actually critically important to us economically, as well as Andy says, it's so important for so many other social and economic objectives we want to try and pursue for our people, and it employs a large number of our citizens. The furlough scheme is due to end at the end of September, and you know, unless the government does come behind this sector and support financially over this period, we're not only going to see theatres close, we're going to dissipate the extraordinary talent and capability that we have amongst people working in that sector now, and it'll be so hard to build that up again. So, you know, it's a question of the government seeing this interim period as one in which, looking beyond to the future next year, when hopefully theatres can open and be economically viable, even if on a different basis, that we keep hold of as much of that talent and expertise as we can, and keep them connected to this really important sector.
Thank you, Bev. And there is, in fact, one more question that maybe Andy wants to address, and I've added it because I have a vested interest in knowing the answer, which is from David Collins at the Sunday Times, which is, do you know of any plans, Andy, or what the plans are for the GMCA in terms of its staff going back to work in its offices in Manchester City Centre full time, or will you be continuing flexible working into 2021?
Thanks, David. It's a good question, and I am very much thinking about this at the moment. The key for us is when the government's advice changes. So as long as the government is saying work from home if you can, for an organisation like ours, obviously we need to follow that, and that's currently the advice. But in anticipation that may change at some point, we are developing a plan. And what I hope is that the plan I develop for the GMCA might form a template that we ask other organisations, office-based organisations in the city centre, to follow. So just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about, I wouldn't imagine more than 25% of GMCA's city centre based staff would come back in the first instance. And also I would have to ensure that if they were coming back in that number, that there was a staggered start time to the working day, because we're looking at 10 to 20% capacity on public transport. It's already at capacity in the morning peak, so we really need to spread the volume of commuters through the day. But having said that, I am keen that we show willing in trying to bring people back, because the vibrancy of Manchester City Centre matters. We want to support the businesses, the shops, the bars, the restaurants. So I'm trying to strike that balance, and what I'm trying to do is bring forward a template that will begin that return to work, and I will be encouraging those who can to go back to work, but of course offering more flexible working to our staff, and I hope other organisations will do the same, balancing work and home, more ability to work from home, or mix office-based work with work from home. Give people who've got caring responsibilities, got children, more ability to have flexible start and end times to the working day. So, what I see is actually a real opportunity here. Greater Manchester has actually got quite a traditional working day, 9 to 5, and that puts everybody on the road at the same time. I think what we've got here is a chance to kind of rethink that and give people a more flexible, more manageable, a better working life. and I'm really determined to take that opportunity. So the GMCA template, which we're working on and I'll publish soon, will hopefully set a template for how the city comes back, but does so in a way that is manageable and keeps the benefits that employees have been experiencing. So it's a really good question. But obviously we wouldn't want to encourage people back until the government advice changes. So thanks for asking that question. Jimmy, shall I just say a final word to sum up? I realise we're almost at our hour. Echoing, I think, what you've just put on the chat. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. As you can see at the moment, you know, there's so many challenges, aren't there, in this moment. To the Trafford Centre, as we're hearing, Bolton, Octagon, to our young people. It's a really tough time, and of course the pressure on Greater Manchester Police and everything that the Deputy Mayor has described. It's a really challenging moment, this one, but we hope that the figures we've given you today will refocus minds on the safety first message. It has to be a safety first message. We have just discussed as a combined authority a year of living with COVID, because that's the reality. This isn't normal. We're going to have to get used to living alongside this virus and stopping it from spreading as we begin to change our lives. So, you know, that's our message today, and you know, we hope it's one, we think it's one that the public will hear, because I would argue the public are probably on the more cautious side of this than some in the government who've been pressing the economic return. So that's where we are. We hope that's been useful to you. As I say, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all next weekend. Have a good one.